It was just another day in a small cafe, the kind where people came to unwind with a coffee and a moment of peace. Conversations filled the air, accompanied by the occasional clatter of cups and plates. The cafe hummed with its usual rhythm until something changed. A young boy sat alone by the window, his head lowered, his fingers nervously tracing the rim of his cup. He didn't look up, as if hoping to go unnoticed. Across the room, two older teens loomed, their tone cutting and unkind, their words unmistakably meant to unsettle. People saw what was happening, their glances fleeting, their discomfort evident, yet no one stepped forward. Barron Trump was there, seated quietly a few tables away. Tall and composed, he might have appeared indifferent, but his demeanor carried a quiet intensity. He observed the situation, his expression steady, his actions deliberate. With calm purpose, he placed his cup down, rose from his seat, and walked toward the unfolding scene. He didn't rush or raise his voice. His approach was measured, yet it commanded attention. The air seemed to shift as he spoke, his tone steady and clear. "What are you trying to accomplish here?" he asked, his words cutting through the tension with disarming precision. The older teens, caught off guard, faltered. One tried to dismiss it with a nervous laugh, but Barron didn't waver. "Does he look like he's enjoying this?" Barron added, his voice carrying not anger, but a firm insistence on accountability. The younger boy, who had been shrinking into his chair moments before, lifted his head slightly, his expression shifting from fear to a faint hope. The room grew still as the exchange unfolded, the quiet conviction in Barron's words resonating with everyone present. The two older teens, now visibly uncomfortable, muttered half-hearted apologies before leaving the cafe. Barron turned to the boy, his demeanor softening. "Are you okay?" he asked. The boy nodded, a small but genuine smile breaking through his earlier apprehension. Around the room, patrons who had remained silent began to react. A man near the counter gave a nod of approval. A woman whispered to her friend, visibly moved. For a moment, the cafe wasn't just a space for coffee and small talk, it had become a place where one person's courage inspired a collective sense of humanity. Barron returned to his table, finished his drink quietly, and left without ceremony. But his actions lingered long after he'd gone. The young boy left later, walking a little taller, and the other patrons carried with them a story they would share for days to come. It was a moment that reminded everyone of the impact of stepping up, even in the simplest of ways. This isn't just a story about Barron Trump. It's about how quiet strength and decisive action can ripple outward, changing more than just one moment. What would you do in a similar situation? Let us know in the comments below, and stay tuned to see how this story continues to inspire. Barron Trump had returned to his seat, his actions simple yet deliberate. While others might have felt the need to explain themselves or bask in the attention, he did neither. He picked up his coffee, took a sip, and resumed his quiet observation of the cafe. But for the people around him, the moment still held an electric charge. It wasn't just what he had done, it was how he had done it, with a calm and quiet resolve that spoke louder than any raised voice. The young boy he had stood up for sat at his table, still processing what had happened. His earlier nervousness was replaced by something else, a tentative confidence, like a flame newly lit. He glanced toward Barron and offered a small nod, a silent gesture of gratitude that spoke volumes. But let's pause here. Imagine being one of the patrons in that cafe. Would you have acted? Would you have stepped forward, or would you have hesitated, unsure of what to do? These are the questions that lingered in the minds of everyone present. It's easy to think we'd all be brave in such a moment, but when faced with the unexpected, hesitation often takes over. For Barron, hesitation wasn't an option. His actions were measured, yes, but not delayed. It was as if he understood that every second of silence carried weight, that stepping in even a moment too late could change everything. This wasn't just a story about stopping bullies, it was a story about noticing what others might ignore and choosing to act anyway. Across the room, conversations began to shift. The woman near the counter leaned over to her companion and murmured, "Did you see how he handled that? No yelling, no scene. Just action." A man near the door nodded silently, sipping his coffee as if he'd just witnessed something profound. Even the barista, busy with a line of customers, stole glances toward Barron. It was clear that what had just happened was not going to fade from memory anytime soon. The cafe, once just a place for routine stops, had become the backdrop for a story that no one would forget. Barron eventually stood up to leave. He moved toward the exit with the same quiet demeanor he had displayed all along. As he passed the boys' table, he paused for a moment, leaned down, and said something. The words were too soft for anyone else to hear, but the boy's expression shifted, a flicker of surprise, followed by a genuine smile. Then, Barron was gone. The question remains, what would you have done in that moment? Would you have been one of the silent observers, unsure of how to intervene, or would you have found the courage to act? It's a question worth reflecting on because moments like these often come without warning. They don't wait for us to be ready. And sometimes, it takes just one person to set an example for everyone else. As the day went on, the cafe returned to its usual pace. But the people inside carried something with them, a memory, yes, but also a question. A challenge, even. Because when someone like Barron Trump steps forward, it reminds us all of the choices we have in moments that matter. What will you choose? Let us know in the comments below. And as always, stay tuned for more stories that remind us of what we're capable of when we rise to the occasion. The young boy had been sitting there, trying his best to disappear into his chair, as the two older teens loomed over him. Their voices weren't loud enough to draw immediate attention, but sharp enough to cut through the ambient sounds of the cafe. "You don't belong here," one of them said, his words pointed, his tone mocking. The other chimed in with a smirk, "Why don't you just leave? Spare everyone the embarrassment." The boy's hands gripped the edges of his seat as he looked down at the table, his silence becoming a shield he desperately hoped would protect him. Around the room, people noticed. A man at the counter glanced over before quickly returning to his phone. A woman near the door shifted uncomfortably in her chair, her face betraying her unease, but she didn't move. Quiet whispers began among a group of friends seated nearby, their words too hushed to discern. And then there was Barron Trump. He sat at a table near the center of the room, his posture relaxed, his expression unreadable. A book rested on the table beside his coffee cup, though it was clear he hadn't turned a page in some time. His focus was elsewhere, his eyes fixed on the scene unfolding in the corner. There was nothing dramatic about his reaction. He didn't slam his book shut or leap to his feet. Instead, he sat quietly, observing, as if weighing every possible action. His calm demeanor was an undeniable contrast to the growing discomfort around him. Barron seemed to understand that the timing had to be right, that rushing in might not diffuse the situation but exacerbate it. The tension in the room continued to build as the bullies leaned closer to the boy, their words taking on a more hostile edge. "Are you just going to sit there? Or maybe you think you're better than us," one of them taunted, his voice louder now, drawing more eyes toward their table. The boy flinched but didn't respond, his knuckles white as he clutched the edge of the table. The patrons around them grew increasingly uneasy. A couple sitting near the back exchanged glances but remained rooted in their seats. The barista behind the counter hesitated mid-pour, her hand gripping the handle of the coffee pot as she looked toward the scene. It was as though the entire room was collectively holding its breath, waiting for someone, anyone, to step in. And then Barron moved. Slowly, deliberately, he stood, his tall frame commanding attention without needing to demand it. The room seemed to shift with him, the quiet murmur of voices ceasing as he walked toward the boys' table. Each step felt deliberate, like he was calculating the exact moment to intervene. The bullies turned to him as he approached, their expressions flickering between confusion and annoyance. "What's your problem?" one of them asked, his bravado slipping slightly under Barron's steady gaze. But Barron didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked at the boy, his voice calm but firm when he finally spoke. "You okay?" The boy looked up, startled, his fear replaced by a flicker of relief. He nodded, though his voice failed him. Barron turned his attention back to the teens, his tone unwavering as he said, "I think you've said enough. Don't you? The room was silent, every pair of eyes fixed on the scene. The bullies hesitated, their earlier confidence faltering under the weight of Barron's presence. One of them muttered something under his breath, and they both turned and walked away, their exit as unceremonious as their entrance had been aggressive. The boy exhaled, his shoulders relaxing as he muttered a quiet, "Thank you." Barron didn't linger. He gave the boy a small nod before returning to his table, the cafe slowly coming back to life as the tension ebbed away. But what would you have done if you were there? Would you have stepped in like Barron, or would hesitation have held you back? It's a question worth asking, because moments like these can happen anywhere, to anyone. Sometimes, all it takes is one person to change the course of an uncomfortable moment. So, what would you do? Let us know in the comments, and stick around to hear more stories that challenge us to think about the power of standing up for what's right. When he reached the young boy's table, Barron paused, his gaze steady and direct as it swept over the two older teens. Their smug expressions faltered, replaced by a flicker of uncertainty. They weren't used to being confronted, especially not by someone so composed. He spoke with a voice that was calm yet firm, carrying an edge that demanded attention without needing to raise its volume. "What do you gain from this?" Barron asked, his words cutting through the tension like a scalpel. "Does it make you feel stronger to put someone else down? Or is it just easier than showing strength through kindness?" The cafe was silent, the kind of silence that felt heavy, meaningful. The older teens exchanged uneasy glances. One of them shifted his weight awkwardly, his bravado visibly slipping under Barron's steady gaze. The other opened his mouth as if to respond, but no words came. The confidence they had worn so easily moments ago had vanished, replaced by the weight of embarrassment and perhaps just a touch of self-awareness. For the young boy, something shifted. He had been hunched over, his posture shrinking under the weight of their ridicule, but now he sat up a little straighter. His grip on the edge of the table loosened, his eyes no longer fixed downward but instead cautiously meeting Barron's. It was as if he had been given permission to take up space again, to reclaim a sense of self that had momentarily been stolen from him. Barron didn't stop there. "You can choose to be better," he said, his tone unwavering. "It takes more courage to be kind than to tear someone down. So what kind of person do you want to be?" The teen's discomfort was evident. One muttered an apology, barely audible, while the other simply nodded before they both turned and walked out of the cafe. Their departure was met with an almost palpable sense of relief, but also something more, a quiet sense of admiration from the onlookers who had witnessed the exchange. The boy looked up at Barron, his voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you," he said, his gratitude evident in those two simple words. Barron offered a small nod and placed a reassuring hand on the boy's shoulder for a brief moment. It wasn't a grand gesture, but it didn't need to be. It was enough. As Barron returned to his table, the atmosphere in the cafe began to shift. Conversations that had halted now resumed, but they carried a different tone. Patrons exchanged glances and soft words, some offering quiet smiles in Barron's direction. It was clear that what had just happened wasn't merely an isolated moment. It was the kind of event that left a mark, that stayed with people long after they left. What would you have done in that moment? Would you have spoken up, or would hesitation have held you back? It's easy to imagine ourselves as the hero in these situations, but the reality is often far more complicated. Sometimes it takes seeing someone else step forward to remind us of our own power to act. What do you think? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and stay with us as we explore more moments that challenge us to reflect on what it means to stand up for others when it matters most. The boy, who moments earlier had seemed so small and overwhelmed, now sat up straighter. His eyes met those of the patrons around him, a newfound sense of belonging reflected in his expression. An older woman from a nearby table leaned in with a gentle smile, saying, "You handled that well, young man." Another patron gave a quiet thumbs up, a simple yet powerful act of solidarity. From the back of the cafe, a slow clap began. It wasn't loud or theatrical, but it carried a sincerity that rippled through the room. Soon, others joined in, their applause growing steadily. It wasn't just for Barron, it was for the moment itself, a collective acknowledgement of kindness and courage in a situation where it had been sorely needed. Barron, now standing near the door, paused as the applause reached him. He didn't linger on the attention, his expression remaining composed yet warm. Turning back toward the young boy, he took a step closer and knelt slightly to meet him at eye level. "You did great," Barron said quietly, his words carrying a genuine weight. The boy's voice, though still soft, carried a confidence that hadn't been there before. "Thank you," he replied. There was no need for anything more. The exchange between them, brief as it was, held an undeniable depth. It was a moment that transcended words, one where actions had spoken far louder. As the bullies exited the cafe, their departure was unremarkable, almost muted. They didn't meet anyone's gaze, their earlier bravado now replaced with what seemed to be quiet introspection. Perhaps they were replaying the scene in their minds, recognizing the impact of their actions in a way they hadn't expected. Their exit, though subtle, left a mark, a reminder that even those who falter can find space for reflection. The boy's demeanor had transformed. Where he had once seemed to shrink into the background, he now sat with his shoulders squared, his head held higher. Barron's intervention had done more than end a moment of cruelty, it had given the boy the courage to reclaim his confidence. The cafe, now buzzing with quiet conversation, felt lighter somehow. People returned to their drinks and discussions, but the story of what had unfolded would undoubtedly be retold. It wasn't just a tale of standing up to bullies, it was a testament to how one small act could inspire a room full of people to see things differently. And for those watching this now, here's the real question: what would you have done in that cafe? Would you have been a silent observer, waiting for someone else to act, or would you have taken a step forward? Moments like these challenge all of us to reflect on what we stand for and how we show up for others when it truly counts. Leave a comment below and share your thoughts. Have you ever witnessed or experienced a moment like this? How did it shape you? Stay tuned for more stories that remind us of the power of standing together in the face of adversity. The patrons, too, left with something more than just their coffee. They walked away with a story, one they would tell friends and family later. It wasn't just about Barron's actions, it was about how one moment of courage had shifted the atmosphere of an entire room. People had seen what kindness and resolve looked like in real time, and they carried that image with them. Barron's approach was a lesson in itself. He hadn't raised his voice or caused a commotion. His calm yet firm demeanor spoke volumes, proving that effective leadership doesn't need to be loud. One calm voice, steady and resolute, had silenced hostility and inspired courage. The moment also served as a reminder that making a difference doesn't require grand gestures. Barron hadn't sought attention, he simply did what needed to be done. His actions showed that standing up for what's right can be quiet and deliberate yet deeply impactful. And that brings us to the core of this story's lesson: it's not about creating a spectacle, it's about making a meaningful change. In that tense moment, Barron didn't aim to dominate the room. He aimed to restore dignity, to remind everyone present of the strength in choosing kindness over cruelty. His calm courage turned what could have been a forgettable, uncomfortable scene into an unforgettable example of humanity at its best. Now, let's turn the question to you. Have you ever been in a situation where you had to decide whether to act or remain silent? What did you do, and how did it feel? Moments like these challenge us all to reflect on our values and how we show up for others when it truly counts. Your thoughts matter, and your perspective could inspire someone else. Share your ideas in the comments below. Let's start a conversation about courage, empathy, and the role each of us plays in creating a more supportive world. If this story moved you or sparked something within, take a moment to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us bring more powerful stories like this to light. Don't forget to share this video with someone who might need a reminder that even the smallest acts of kindness can have a profound impact. And don't go anywhere, we have so much more to share with you. Next time, we'll uncover another incredible story that proves just how far a little courage and compassion can go. Make sure to stay tuned, and as always, thank you for being part of this journey with us.